The Copper Bloom. Chapter 1: A Spark of Copper and Light. In a quiet little workshop tucked between a bakery and a bookshop, lived Mira, a young jewelry maker whose creations seemed to carry whispers of old magic. One rainy afternoon, she found a coil of warm copper wire on her desk, left by a mysterious stranger with a note that read, "Shape it into something that blooms, and it will find its way to the one who needs it most." Intrigued, Mira bent the copper into delicate flowers, threading them with shimmering crystal beads the color of moonlight and deep ocean. As she finished the final twist, the earrings glowed faintly, as if breathing for the first time. That evening, a shy woman named Alara wandered into the shop, drawn by something she couldn't explain. When she put on the copper flower earrings, her eyes lit up, the rain outside slowed, and the scent of spring blossoms filled the air. But Mira noticed something strange. The copper wire she had left was still warm, and there was enough to make another pair. Chapter 2: The Second Bloom. The rain had stopped the next morning, but the air still smelled of wet earth and wildflowers. Mira sat at her workbench, the warm coil of copper waiting patiently, as if it knew its turn had come. She worked in silence, shaping the wire into twin spirals that curled like unfurling petals. This time, she chose tiny amber crystals, each one catching the sunlight in a golden shimmer. As she finished, the same faint glow pulsed through the metal, a heartbeat of warmth in her palm. That afternoon, a boy no older than 12 ran into the shop, holding a small folded map. "Miss, are you the one who makes the flower earrings?" he asked breathlessly. "I think these are for my sister. She hasn't smiled since." His voice faltered. Mira handed him the earrings without asking for payment. "Take them to her, and tell her the flowers are still blooming, even in the dark." Later that night, the boy returned, but not alone. His sister, wearing the copper blooms, stood beside him with tears in her eyes. "They make me feel like I can start again," she whispered. Mira smiled, but her gaze fell to the copper coil. It was smaller now, yet still warm, and there was just enough left for one last creation. Somehow, she knew the next piece would change everything. Chapter 3: The Last Thread. Days passed, and Mira couldn't shake the feeling that the copper coil was watching her. Each time she touched it, a faint hum ran through her fingertips, like the whisper of a voice she couldn't quite hear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted her shop in amber light, the door creaked open. The same cloaked stranger who had left the copper months ago stepped inside. His eyes calm, but carrying the weight of storms, lingered on the nearly empty coil. "You've used it well," he said quietly. "Each piece you made carried a seed, and each seed has taken root." Mira's heart pounded. "Who are you, and why me?" He placed a small wooden box on her table. Inside, a single pearl gleamed, but it wasn't ordinary. Fine threads of gold ran through it like veins, pulsing with the same heartbeat as the copper had. "Because the last creation will need more than beauty," he replied. "It will need your courage." Before she could speak again, he was gone, the bell over her door swinging gently in his wake. Mira looked at the pearl, then at the coil. There was just enough copper for one final piece. Whatever it would be, she sensed it wouldn't just belong to someone, it would find them. And when it did, the story would change forever. Chapter 4: The Stranger's Warning. The morning sun had barely risen above the rooftops, yet the marketplace was already alive. Stalls overflowed with fruits still wet from the dawn harvest. The smell of warm bread drifted through the air, and coins clinked like distant chimes. Mira sat behind her small table, arranging her newest creation, the copper and tiger's eye earrings. She had finished them only hours earlier, after a night of restless work. The copper wire had fought her at every turn, curling and resisting as though it had its own will. When she finally tamed it into delicate loops, the tiger's eye stones seemed to pulse under the lamplight, their golden bands shifting like the gaze of something quietly observing. Now, under the daylight, they looked even more alive. Customers passed by, some glancing at them, some stopping to admire. But it was the man in the dark coat who truly noticed. He approached without a sound, his presence sharp enough to make Mira's hands still, his gaze fixed not on her, but on the earrings. "Beautiful work," he said softly, his voice too calm to be casual. "Thank you," she replied, forcing a polite smile. Their tiger's eye, wrapped in copper, he finished for her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not an ordinary choice, unless you know why." Mira frowned. "I use it for the warmth of its color, its flexibility." He shook his head. "Copper remembers." Before she could ask what he meant, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No coin, no introduction, just a faint, almost reluctant movement as he slid it across the table. "Keys," he murmured, leaning in, "should never be left unguarded." And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd before she even thought to call after him. When she finally unfolded the paper, she found a crude hand-drawn map. There was no name, no instructions, only a single red mark, a place she recognized instantly, her grandmother's old workshop. The last time she had been there, she was a child, and the door had been locked for years. Chapter 5: The Locked Workshop. The map lay on Mira's workbench for hours after the stranger left. She told herself she wouldn't go, that it was just a strange man's trick, some odd attempt at mystery to make her uneasy. But the truth was, the pull was too strong. By late afternoon, she was walking toward the edge of town, past streets she hadn't wandered in years. The air grew quieter the farther she went, until even the chatter of the market faded into the soft crunch of her boots on gravel. Her grandmother's workshop stood just where she remembered, a small, weathered building, with ivy creeping over its windows, and the faint smell of metal clinging to its walls, as though years of hammering, polishing, and soldering had soaked into the wood. The lock was still there, an old brass one, tarnished green at the edges. She reached for it, but her hand hesitated. And that's when she noticed the hinge, wrapped in a thin strand of copper wire. Not new copper, not bright, aged, darkened, and yet somehow warm to the touch. Mira unwound the wire slowly. It was wound in a perfect spiral, tight enough that it had to have been done by someone with skill or intent. When it finally came free, the lock clicked open without a key. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but it wasn't the kind of decay she expected. Tools still hung neatly on the walls. Jars of stones, beads, and metal coils sat untouched. But in the center of the room stood something she didn't remember from her childhood: a small wooden chest. It was bound with copper strips, their surface engraved with patterns that seemed to shift in the light. For a moment, the tiger's eye earrings in her pocket felt heavier, almost pulling toward the chest. On the lid, in faint lettering only visible when the sunlight hit just right, was a single word: remembrance. Chapter 6: The Copper Memory. Mira's fingers trembled as she ran them over the engraved copper bands. The patterns weren't random, they were tiny, delicate shapes of leaves, flowers, and waves. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, telling her how every metal holds a memory if you listen closely enough. With a deep breath, she slid the copper bands apart and lifted the lid. Inside was not gold, not jewels, but a collection of small, handmade pieces of jewelry. Some were simple copper rings, others were intricate earrings, each paired with a note written in her grandmother's looping handwriting. One note stopped her breath. It was tied to a pair of earrings, almost identical to the tiger's eye ones she had made, except the stones were older, the copper caps worn smooth with time. Beneath the earrings lay something stranger, a thin sheet of hammered copper etched with what looked like a map, but not of anywhere she knew. The rivers bent in impossible shapes, and the mountains formed patterns like the petals of a flower. The earrings in her pocket warmed, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time, she realized the copper wasn't just a metal from the earth. It was alive in its own way, holding voices, places, and memories that weren't hers. Somewhere out there, the copper's trail waited, and she intended to follow.